Hello everyone, have a nice day. Today, we'll explore the next chapter in Uri and Tu Tieu's journey. Last time, Uri photographed Tu Tieu for the first time in one tender frame that held a fragile piece and a morning-bright smile. Now the village asks them to capture 30 years in a single image, memory, pride, and light in one frame. But jealousy steps in, glass breaks, and both love and craft are tested. Can they rebuild before the ceremony begins and prove that broken light can still shine? If this sounds interesting, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next videos. Crack. Glass split the afternoon clean in two, a bright, violent sound that turned the little Photoshop into a storm. Shards skittered across the tile like rain made of mirrors. The village banyan, rooftops, kites, the tea-drinking elders tore diagonally inside the frame, a wound you could point to. Lynn stood over it in a pink jacket that caught every stray beam of light, as if she'd hijacked the sun. Her hands hovered near the fallen frame, not touching. "I didn't mean," she began, voice smooth in a way accidents never are. Tu Tieu didn't breathe. Uri did, once, steady, then crouched, palms open above the glittering field. "You can't destroy what you never helped build," he said, low, almost gentle, and somehow heavier than anger. The door chime trembled as Lynn turned and left. The shop, for a heartbeat, had no sound except the hum of the lightbox and the faint sting of fixer hanging in the air. Hours earlier, dawn had arrived like a promise the wind believed in. The sun climbed soft and wide over the rooftops, and the village stretched into its 30th anniversary like a child wearing something a little too big. On the main street, a banner with thick brush strokes read, "30 years together." Steam from rice cakes drifted in white strands. Lemons stacked in bright pyramids perfumed the lane with clean sweetness. Children ran with paper flags, laughing like bells. Inside the small Photoshop, light pooled and stayed. Tu Tieu wiped the front glass in slow circles until her reflection steadied. Uri balanced on a ladder with a roll of ocean blue backdrop, the kind of blue you could feel with your fingertips, tightening it 2 notches higher. "Higher?" he asked. "2 fingers," she said, eyes narrowing at the edge of the roll. She had that look she got when light became language. Footsteps on the wooden threshold. The head of the committee filled the doorway with a smile you could hang bunting from. "Uri, Tu Tieu," he said, hat in his hands like this was a temple. "We'd like you two to make the picture. The frame will be displayed at the ceremony." "Us?" The cloth in Tu Tieu's hand turned suddenly significant like touching a vow. Uri climbed down, brushed the dust from his camera bag, and nodded as if a door inside him had just swung open. "Then we'll make sure it's worth remembering." By mid-morning, they had climbed the hill, where the whole village fits under your gaze if your chest is wide enough. The banyan held one side, like an elder with a long memory. The old rice mill steadied the other like a shoulder that knew work. Fog curled around the edges of rooftops and wouldn't entirely let go, as if the morning liked the village too much to stop touching it. "Here," Tu Tieu whispered, lifting her hand to measure the light. Thumb and forefinger framed a space the heart had already chosen. Uri crouched, dew wet the knee of his jeans. He watched sunlight slide across her fingers before he tilted the lens toward the scene. "Perfect. Don't move." "I'm not the model this time," she teased. "Everyone is, if the light finds them right." The shutter answered for him. Click, then another, like the hill, borrowing their pulse. A kite angled up. A dog slept against a bicycle. An old couple sipped tea thin as breath. The camera held it all without taking anything away. In the afternoon, I found them at the work table with trays breathing their quiet alchemy. The timer ticked like a polite heartbeat. In the amber glow, the image approached from the white. Rooftops under the banyan's reach. The mill patient, a child mid-laugh. And then, as if the village wanted to sign its own name, a faint reflection surfaced in a shop window, Uri's profile. The line of Tu Tieu's jaw, both of them standing together at the edge of the frame like a secret the light had told. "It looks alive," she said, covering her mouth, because sometimes joy needs both hands. "It is alive," he murmured. "That's the point." They chose wood, with grain like rings of time. Sanded, polished, oiled each pass a kind of affection. When the print slid beneath new glass, the whole piece felt hushed, like a promise being placed in two hands. The chime on the door rang once. Lynn entered with daylight clinging to her. Pink caught the light. Her smile did not. "It's been a while," she said, eyes scanning the walls where laughter lived inside frames. "So, this is where everyone's talking about." "Lynn," Tu Tieu said, polite, warm, without opening a door too far. "Would you like to see our new work?" "Just curious." Lynn's fingers brushed a stack of unmounted prints, the way you touch something you might claim later. "The whole village seems to think you two are artists now." "We're just doing our part," Uri said, voice level as a spirit level. "Your part," Lynn repeated lightly, tipping her face toward Tu Tieu. "Or her part." The clock took 2 slow ticks to find its next second. The dryer hummed. The lemon on the windowsill was bright and useless. "It's late," Uri said, stepping between them without becoming a wall. "You should rest." Lynn's gaze had already landed on the frame marked in pencil. "For the ceremony." She approached it with the softness of a person who knows softness can cut deeper. "Funny," she said, drawing a nail along the edge. "One photo, and suddenly everyone forgets who first taught Uri where the shutter lives." Tu Tieu's fingers tightened on a cloth. Uri's jaw changed shape, not harder, just decided. Lynn smiled, almost kind. "Relax, I'm not here to fight." She turned, gold light sliding off her shoulder. "I only wanted to see what perfection looks like before it breaks." The chime kissed metal. She left. The bulb above the frame glowed on, steady as a heartbeat that refuses to speed up for trouble. "She won't stop here," Tu Tieu said, not as fear as the weather report. "Then we'll guard it together," Uri answered. Morning returned thinner, fog dropped lower, and the banner across the street lifted like a sleeping chest. On the corner stove, tea steamed. Uri lifted the finished print into a fresh glass, slower than prayer. Inside the picture, light seemed to originate rather than arrive. "It feels like everything we've worked for is right here," Tu Tieu said, eyes bright with the idea of tears. "After lunch, we'll take it to the hall," Uri said, snapping the backplate closed. The click sounded like a period. But afternoon arrived with a smudge on it. A small wind moved the lane, carrying dust and something like a whisper that wouldn't own itself. Tu Tieu, back from delivering wallet prints for a birthday and 2 passport photos bound for the district bus, found the door half open. The curtain breathed in, breathed out. Spilled fixers laced the air with a bite of metal. "Uri?" she called. No answer. Only the lightbox, patient, and the little rattle of a chime that couldn't decide to speak. Then Lynn, by the counter, the frame in her hands. Lynn! The name tore out of Tu Tieu and came back whole. Lynn turned as if time obeyed her. Oh, she said, I didn't think you'd be back this soon. She stroked the surface with 2 fingers. It's beautiful, so perfect, almost unreal. Put it down, Tu Tieu said. Not louder, closer. People think you're gentle, Lynn murmured. They don't see how tightly you hold what isn't yours. Uri burst from the back, sleeves damp, wrists smelling of chemicals. Lynn. Her heel found the corner of the mat. The frame slid. Glass met tile. Crack. Shards leapt and went still. The photograph split along one merciless diagonal, a long, bright scar across the village's face. Tu Tieu knelt before her knees, remembered how to do it. Her hands hovered over the pieces, useless wings. It's ruined, she whispered, the word itself made of edges. Uri's eyes lifted to hers. Not anger. Something older. The file is safe, he said softly. We can print again. Lynn's mask wrinkled regret, or the performance of it then smoothed. She stepped back. The chime gave one clean note as she left and swallowed the rest. Outside, the banner stirred like a mouth practicing its lines. Inside, the lightbox hummed, steady as a small, stubborn sun. The day that had started tender had found its blade. Tomorrow is the ceremony, Tu Tieu said. Uri looked at the torn image on the floor of the village in 2 halves that still recognized each other. He reached for the power switch, the printer's panel waking in a dim glow. Then tonight, he said, we build again. They didn't turn on every light, just the ones that mattered. Uri woke the printer. The panel rose with a gentle green, like a promise you could pocket. Tu Tieu cleared the bench, swept the shards into a shoebox carefully, 2 hands, as if gathering rain, and rolled a fresh cutting mat flat with her forearms. Outside, the lane softened to whispers. Inside, the room filled with the practical music of 2 people refusing to lose. Paper? Uri asked. Mat, she said. It forgives more, and it keeps warmth. He nodded. The profile curves came up on the screen, blacks to anchor, highlights to breathe. The file waited, whole and unslashed, but the torn print on the floor kept flickering at the edge of vision. A warning not to blink too long. The power jittered once then again, like an old chest catching breath. The printer paused mid-feed. Not now, Tu Tieu whispered, gripping the table. Uri crossed to the counter and clicked on the small emergency lamp they kept for storms. A coin of light bloomed. The shop narrowed to the circle their hands could still see. He returned, set his palm on her shoulder. Look, he said. We're okay. Her breath let go. We are. They started again. When the new print slid out, it carried silence, like a river carries sky. They hovered without touching until the paper cooled, the way you hover by a cradle, because awe prefers a little distance. Under the lamp, a flaw announced itself without shame. A soft light leak in the far corner, a diagonal blush as if sunrise had decided to sign the image. It's there, she said, not sorry. So are we, he answered. Sometimes the break rewrites the light. They chose a frame whose grain still remembered the wind. Tu Tieu set the points with her thumbnail. Uri pressed the backing home with a cloth so the wood wouldn't bruise. The glass settled without a sound, as if the room had learned not to tempt fate with chimes. When they lifted the finished piece, Both looked for something to fear and couldn't find it quickly. "It's imperfect," she said. "So is everything that lasts," he said, night thin to a gray line at the window. Somewhere, a rooster practiced optimism and stopped. They slept 2 hours sitting side by side on the bench, shoulders falling together, because habit is another word for trust, and woke when the first bicycle threaded the lane like a taut string. "Time," Uri said. "Time," she echoed. They wrapped the frame in the old white cloth with coffee stains only love notices and carried the weight between them. On the street, neighbors unfolded chairs and swept dust into neat, hopeful piles. The banner read what it had read yesterday, 30 years together, and somehow more. As they turned into the square, a ripple moved through the bodies the way wind travels a field. Hands rose not to snatch the frame, but to steady the air around it. The committee head met them halfway, hat folded against his chest, as if entering a chapel. "You work through," he said softly, not asking. "Together," Uri said. "Then let the village see itself together," the head replied. On the stage, the stand waited, polished, modest, certain. They set the frame into its cradle. For a moment, the cloth lay over it like a held breath. Then Tu Tieu slipped the cover down and caught the edge so it wouldn't slap. The square inhaled. There was the hill, the banyans' patient spread, the mill holding its shoulder under the weight of years, rooftops nested like a chorus, a small kite, mid-tilt, an old couple beside steam. In the shop windows, faint reflection, less accident now, more intention. Uri and Tu Tieu stood side by side, not centered, not large, but undeniable. The way a signature sits low and means everything. A sound like water moved through the crowd and became applause that didn't want to stop. The committee head's eyes brightened. He wiped quickly, guarding dignity. "You've kept what we've done," he said, breaking a little. "And you've added what we didn't know we were." Near the lemon stall, a streak of pink paused at the shade's edge. Lynn watched face still as cooling glass. For a heartbeat, something wavered, envy, regret. A question hunting its mouth, then steadied again. She turned, as if distance could stitch the tears she had made. She did not vanish. The square wasn't that kind of place. People noticed without pointing. Noticing is a language villages keep. No one moved to confront her. The memory on the stage was the only answer needed. The head began the ceremony. Names, seasons, the flood that warped the hall's beams, the year the rice ran thin, the first cooperative meeting under the banyan when the generator died and everyone clapped to keep warm. Uri let the cadence wash through him. Tu Tieu watched how the diagonal light leak caught noon and refused to be shy. That slender seam that insisted on being seen. "It's beautiful," a child at the front said. "It's us," his mother answered. After the speeches, people drifted closer in a soft tide palms, hovering near the frame the way bees reason with flowers. Ms. Hua arrived with banana leaf rice cakes, laughed her bright laugh, and told Uri the mill had not looked so tidy since she was young. Uncle Tuan, who once replaced their fuse in a thunderstorm, tapped the border with a knuckle and nodded wood greeting wood. The microphone rose again. "Before we close," the committee head said, "I'd like to invite the two who carried our memory through the night." Uri glanced at Tu Tieu. She shook her head, smiling because she already knew. He stepped forward anyway and drew her with him by the fingertips, the way you ask courage to come into the light. We pressed a button, Uri began, and the square chuckled because it knew better. He let the sound fade. We pressed it together. When it broke, we built it again together. That's all I have. The head pointed gently to the corner. Some of you haven't seen it yet, he said. There's a thread of light here, a flaw, if you count that way, a blessing, if you've lived long enough to stop. It happened last night. We'll keep it. Let it remind us what almost ended. Applause rose and settled like birds. A two-piece band by the tea stall found a melody. Children tried being windy and succeeded. On the fringe, Lynn paused once more. She could leave. No one would stop her. Instead, she looked back at the frame, at the faint reflection of two people inside a world they chose, at the diagonal glimmer that wouldn't apologize. Her mouth moved, maybe a word, maybe a swallow. Then she turned down the lane where the lemons made the air too honest and went. Chairs stacked. Compliments turned into small stories. Who helped when? Who remembered what? Uri and Tu Tieu remained a while in the stage's shade. The frame stayed where it was, watched over by the banyan's patient hands. You're quiet, he said. I'm listening, she said. To what? She nodded at the hall slats, where light wrote thin stripes across the floorboards, to the way the day forgives. He looked at her in the morning and found her cheekbones and decided to stay. We should rest, he said. In a bit. He hesitated. About Lynn. She tried, Tu Tieu said, not unkind. She may try again in some other shape. We will do what we did build again, or let the village help us hold it. He followed her gaze. Ms. Hoa, cutting rice cakes for two boys. The committee head folding the banner's rope tighter. The mill door propped open, as if history were bored of being closed. Then that's what we'll do, he said. We'll hold it. A small breeze threaded the square lemon and tea and the faint iron of old machines. Above, kites sewed the sky into a patient net. Look, Tu Tieu said. From here, the light leak had caught noon and turned to a narrow gold stitch. It ran through the corner like a seam that refused invisibility. It's staying, she whispered. It is, he said. They didn't touch the frame. They didn't have to. It was already touching everything else. Later, when they unwrapped the shop door and let the chime speak again, the village poured in portraits to book, news to trade, laughter to frame, troubles in quieter colors. And if someone in a pink jacket returned someday with the weather at her back, the lamp would still be where they left it, the file would still be safe, and the two of them would stand, shoulder to shoulder, in the same light that had once rewritten itself into grace.
Câu chuyện kể về bối cảnh trong kỷ niệm 35 thành lập làng Ly Uri và Tu Tieu được chọn để tạo ra một bức ảnh tượng trưng cho sự đoàn kết và hy vọng. Khi họ làm việc say mê, tác phẩm nghệ thuật của họ cũng phản ánh tình yêu thầm lặng giữa họ, nhưng Linh không thể buông bỏ quá khứ đã đến và làm vỡ bức ảnh quý giá. Một hành động ghen tuông trá hình như một tai nạn. Không chịu bỏ cuộc, Uri Tu Tieu dành cả đêm để xây dựng lại hình ảnh, biến thiệt hại thành vẻ đẹp. Bức ảnh mới được đánh dấu bằng một vệt sáng vàng, trở thành biểu tượng của sự kiên cường và tha thứ. Trong buổi lễ, làng không chỉ tôn vinh bức ảnh mà còn tôn vinh tinh thần đằng sau nó, là những gì đã vỡ vẫn có thể tỏa sáng. Trong đám đông, Linh lặng lẽ quan sát, nhận ra rằng những ánh sáng không thể nào bị phá hủy.